Hi, I'm Crystal Cup, and this is Cups in the Kitchen. Today I want to share with you a recipe that I have adapted. It is called Ezekiel bread. Ezekiel bread is a yeast bread, but it's a bread that is taken out of the Old Testament of the Bible, where Ezekiel the prophet ate this bread that was very good for him. Now, there are several different variations of this that you can find if you Google it on the internet. But the one that I've chosen and adapted to my bread maker is one that you have to grind your own grains and beans. So, I'm going to show you a clip here of the actual recipe as I've adapted it and the ingredients. So take a look at this. So here are the ingredients for the Ezekiel bread that we're about to make. And I'm going to zoom in here on the actual recipe so you can see it. It takes 1 1/4 cups of wheat berries, which is actually just wheat, 1/4 cup of pearl barley, 1/4 cup of millet, a tablespoon of dry green lentils, dry Great Northern beans, dry kidney beans, dried pinto beans, 3/4 cup of spelt flour, 2 cups of warm water, 1/2 cup of honey, 1/4 cup of olive oil, a package of active dry yeast, and 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay, now that you've seen the actual recipe as I've printed it out and the ingredients, what I have here in this bowl is all of my dry ingredients that I've listed out to you before, with the exception of the yeast. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm taking all of my dry ingredients that I've listed out to you before, and I'm putting them in my Vitamix. Now, you can also use a blend tack. I have a blend tack as well. Or you can use a flour mill or grain grinder, they call them. The first blender that I had that was strong enough to actually grind this up was my blend tack. But then I was able to have a Vitamix thanks to my uncle, and so I use my Vitamix now to grind this to make the flour, quote unquote, for my Ezekiel bread. So I have all of my dry ingredients with the exception of the salt and the yeast in this blender that's with Vitamix. So I'm going to make my flour now. Okay, as I look at it, it looks like it is well ground into a flour for me. And it's important that it look like a flour texture, even though it's actually beans and the other grains that we've put in. You want it to be ground really well. And the Vitamix or the blend tack, either one are able to do this. I'm sure there's other machines on the market that can do it as well, but a machine that's not powerful enough to grind grain will melt, and so you don't want to use something that's not solid enough. There are recipes on the internet that you can look up that actually have you use a canned version of the beans. I've not tried that yet, and perhaps I'll do that in a subsequent video, so you may stay tuned. I come from a long line of bread making women, yeast bread making women and biscuit bread making women, but we so enjoy the yeast breads. and especially whole wheat, whole grain breads. I have a whole wheat bread recipe that I'll share in another video. This is my second bread maker. So one of the things that I have found about bread makers is each one varies a little bit. So you have to sort of do the test for yourself of what function works like you want it to for each recipe, and then have those tried and true recipes that you use on a regular basis. So in this particular bread maker, I take my bread pan. The first thing you always want to do, and trust me, I've learned this the hard way, you want to be sure that you have your bread mixing paddle in. I can't tell you how disheartening it is to put all of your ingredients in and push all the right buttons only to realize you didn't put the mixing paddle in. So be sure that you've got your mixing paddle in the pan, okay? Then the next thing that you do in a bread maker, and making bread in a bread machine is different than making bread by hand. I didn't think I would ever want to do it, but the time savings has made all the difference in the world to me. So I have my bread pan. So the first thing you're going to do is put all of your liquids and your salt. Okay? So the first thing we have is we have 2 cups of very warm water. So I'm going to put that in. The next thing I have is a 1/2 cup of honey. So I'm going to put that in. 1/2 cup of honey. Once you put in your 1/2 cup of honey, you're going to put in a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Then you're going to put in your salt. Okay, so it's all of your liquids and then your salt. Now this is a rule of thumb, as I have found, for every bread maker. Start with the liquids and then put in your salt. And sometimes I'll even sort of stir that around just a tad. Okay, all of my liquids and my salt. Now, you want to keep your yeast until the very last thing. And you never want your yeast in a bread maker to get wet prior to the mixing. So, now that I have all of my liquids and I have my salt in my bread pan, I'm going to now put in my mixture that is grains and beans. Okay? So, I'm going to pour this in. Be sure that you get it all in there. Set that aside. Now, the next thing that you want to do is you want to make a little well. So I'll use my spoon here. And you definitely don't want to get any liquid in this, okay? So you want to dig a well down in those grains and beans flour mixture, sort of like a little indention, but you don't want, definitely don't want to have any liquid in it, because you do not want your yeast to get wet prior to the beginning of the mixing cycle. I'm going to take my yeast. I'm going to pour it right down into the middle of my little indention. It's all dry. The water and the liquids are on the bottom. Okay. I am now ready to put this in the bread maker. Okay, so those of you who understand bread makers, you know that this will clamp down into the bread maker. Now, each bread maker can be a little different. In my current bread maker, I find that this recipe works best for me if I use it on the 1.5 pound loaf. I use it on the wheat setting, and I use it on a light crust. So each bread maker will have different settings you can use. On this one, I use 1.5 pound loaf, wheat bread setting, and light crust. then you will see that it turns out to be a wonderful loaf of Ezekiel bread. Now, Ezekiel bread is different than normal yeast bread. It's not, it doesn't poof up. It's a heavier bread. I typically will have 1 slice of Ezekiel bread a day for health benefits, and it's wonderful. Okay, we'll see you in a bit. Welcome back. As you can see, our bread is done and it's hot. So I have taken the bread pan out of the bread maker, and what I do is I turn it upside down. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now, as I told you, Ezekiel bread, while it's a yeast bread, it doesn't rise up like regular yeast bread because of the beans and the whole grains. This is a handy little tool that you use to pull out the paddle. So you see, you pull that out, and we have a beautiful loaf of Ezekiel bread. Now I will let this cool a bit. I slice 1 slice at a time as I need it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll have another episode of Cups in the Kitchen for you very soon. God bless you.